Hi, hello everyone. Um, as you know, I'm doing the introductory sort of uh, presentation about myself and also what the course will be, what you expect from the course, and how it can help you with regards to the design and practice and use of oral history. And we'll be looking at the theoretical parts of oral history as well as the practical. Of course, I should introduce myself first. I'm Dr. Loka Singh. I'm a historian. I'm specifically a social historian of Singapore. I work almost exclusively on Singapore, and my main interest is in social history um, and related fields like the history of medicine. The last couple of books I wrote were a social history of the Bukit Ho Swee fire, squatters into citizens, to look at how this big fire in Singapore was the catalyst for the making of a modern society and nation. Um, then there was a book on the history of tuberculosis in Singapore, uh, looking across the whole period of Singapore history from the 19th century to the early 21st century, sorry, to see, you know, how far tuberculosis has been part of Singapore history, and what were the changes and continuities between the colonial and post-colonial period. I have another book, the latest book that just came out last year was on the labor history of Singapore's industrialization. To look at Singapore's industrialization from the 60s and 70s, from especially the labor point of view, the social history point of view. So as you can see, social history is sort of in my blood, and it is I think, one of the most important yet neglected ways of looking at history. And of course, for us, for this oral history course, social history has a very strong connection with oral history. So I think what I want to say about myself, I don't want to talk too much about myself. The course is not about me, although it represents sort of my views and my practice of oral history. But I do want to say, therefore, the way that I look at oral history is as a historian, as an academic, first and foremost, and in relation to social history. Right? Social history is the study of the people, to put it in the simplest way, also called history from below, or people's history. So it looks at, in the foreground, right? The central focus of social history is always the people, a group of people, and oral history is a way to write their history if it is within living memory, or if someone had done the oral history a long time before. Therefore, my oral history practice is often because I have certain academic writing projects, research projects. So, for example, the book on the Bukit Ho Swee fire, I did about 100 oral history interviews, mostly with former fire victims and survivors and some eyewitnesses. And so it is their memory, their recollections about the fire and what happened afterwards when they moved into public housing. So it is in that sense, therefore the oral history that I do are always related to academic inquiry, to academic questions. That is not the only way to do oral history, and throughout our module, we will be looking at other practices, other uses of oral history. I should say I have also used oral history for other purposes. I have been involved in a number of community heritage projects. There was project I remember very well. One of my first projects on oral history. In fact, my first one really, which was on leprosy, the history of leprosy in Singapore. And I decided if I was going to know much more as required about leprosy, I had to interview people who had leprosy. I had to get their point of view. So this was part of international project on the history of leprosy, not just of Singapore, but on many countries around the world, as funded and supported by the International Leprosy Association. And we'll be looking at some of these interviews in one of our weeks. I also do, I'm not an academic right now. I'm not a member of the faculty in the department. I run a history consultancy, and therefore I also do some oral history as part of my business consultancy work, which is often very different. The academic, the community, and the business side of oral histories are all quite different, and I will try as much as I can, from my own experience and from the experiences of others who I've cited in the readings for you to read. They have very different views of oral history, and more importantly, that when you use oral history for different purposes, the practice turns out to be quite different. The aims turn out to be quite different. Okay, just to let you know where I'm coming from. Right. So in a sense, the course is sort of my view of oral history, but at the end of the day, I'm open to other views, and also at the end of the day, it is about how oral history will be relevant for you, right? Whether you are going to design some kind of oral history, or you're involved in the practice of history, in public history, in applied history. This is the course on applied and public history, so that is something that you have to cater to your own interests and your own needs. I think so. That's all about myself. So we meet every week Tuesday, 6 to 9 at AS1. So because I'm not a member of the department, if you want a consultation with me, we can do it on that day in the morning between 10 to 12, and we can do this on Zoom instead. I hope that's all right. If you really need to see me in person, we can make an arrangement in the department before the course starts, before the seminar starts. So I'm going to go ahead, but before I do, I want to say also for next week, right? So please be prepared and send me before next week's. By next week, I mean the second class on 16th of August. Email me an introduction about yourself, okay? Because I want to know you and where you're coming from, what your interests are. And so when I give you some advice about the oral history project, which I'll talk about later on, then I can understand the background. Okay, so tell me about yourself, and if you've done oral history before, you've done history before, or done heritage or community projects before, let me know. All right, make it interesting, right? Write the introduction in an interesting way, and show me your interest about or experience with oral history. Okay, so as you can see here, I'm just going to go through the syllabus for our module. So the weightage is 40, 20, 40. The final project is 40%, and the oral history proposal, which is a proposal for the project, is 20%. Right? There are no examinations. Seminar participation is extremely important. It's 40%, right? And it's not just turning up; it's also participating actively, intelligently, and critically in the discussion during the seminar. Right? You have to be prepared for the seminar. I myself have to prepare for the seminars. I don't just come to class and just talk off the top of my head. I have to think about what are the main areas I want to cover every week. And I have to go through the readings again, because the last time I went through them was 1 year ago. I've got to look at the interviews again, because the last time I looked at them was 1 year ago, and there are some new interviews as well, but I've added this time around. So please come prepared, not just in terms of the knowledge you have from the readings and the other tasks, but also to think about what is it you want to learn in this seminar, in this week. If the week is on, let's say, labor history or history of medicine, what is it I want to know about these areas? What are my questions? How do I feel about these topics? Right. So that is the best way then to go through, and make the module most useful for yourself. That's the whole point of it, isn't it? Okay. So there will be no PowerPoint presentations. I will not be making any PowerPoint presentations. We will be having guest speakers, and the guest speakers might want to use PowerPoint, but only for a short while, right? So the bulk of the sort of 3 hours that we have, we won't use the whole 3 hours, and there'll be breaks, of course, but most of the time we'll be discussing, right, in the truest sense of the word. Among the other two items of assessment, right, the first one is the oral history proposal, which is due on 3rd of October 2022. Now all these will be on Luminous or Canvas if you are using Canvas. I don't know what you're using actually. I'm using Luminous still. And all the dates and criteria figures are all there, right? So the oral history proposal is the first assignment to submit, which is somewhere in the middle of the semester. It is actually just before week 8, so sort of between week 7 and week 8, the end of week 7, if you will, right? So it is after the recess week, right, that you want to do this oral history proposal. It is a proposal, as the name suggests, for the project that you want to do. Okay, so I will talk more about this when I meet you, but to go through it briefly, you'll be conducting an interview with a person, or more than one person if you want, but at least a person. Of course, it has to be a person. And this person should be above 40 years of age, so that I don't want you to interview your friend, right? I want you to interview someone who has some deeper recollection from some time ago about their lives. And the interview can be on any topic, right? It can be on just like their childhood, something quite innocent or simple, or it could be something based on an issue if you want, whether it's let's say a financial issue or some event that had happened in their lives, right? So this is for you to decide, and we'll be discussing this in a week. Okay, it can be a family member as well. It can be your parents. I really like it when you interview someone that you know in your family, or maybe someone who's older than you that you know for some time already. Okay, so the proposal should contain these things, right? Please read them. What I want to say here is the proposal should include questions. What are the questions that you want to ask the interviewee? What sort of equipment you want to use? Why do you think this interview is important to do? And what you aim to get out of the interview? What you might think would be some of the issues that will arise right? Theoretical considerations and issues, right? The course is about the theory and the practice of oral history is about 50 and 50, right? So we want to be aware of the academic theoretical considerations that oral history practitioners have encountered and written about. So if you're writing about childhood, for example, what kind of theoretical issues would you think you might face? Would the person remember? Is there a question of reliability? Is there a question of bias? Things like that, all right? So these questions, these theoretical issues are connected to the readings that you do, all right? So in a proposal, you'd be very good if you can cite some of these readings by read 8. Ethical considerations as well. Oral history has ethical considerations because you are dealing with people, right? Any research that deals with people, you essentially need their consent, and you need to be aware. It's not just getting the signature. It's also, more importantly, to be aware of how the interviewee might be adversely affected by an interview, by some of the questions, by remembering certain things. It may not happen, but you want to be prepared if it does happen, what to do. And finally, as part of the proposal, you should include, if you have any plans, what are you going to do after the interview? Are you going to publish the interview on social media, or are you going to send it to the interviewee and the families of the interviewee? Are you going to send it to the community if you think that the interviewee's memories is relevant to the community, is interesting to the community? Okay, and so this is not to exceed 1,000 words. So it's a very short and succinct proposal. Right? Don't make it drawn out. I want it to be useful for you to go to the next thing, right? Which is the final project. Right? The final project is when you actually execute your proposal and you carry out this interview and you reflect on how it went. Okay, interview should be at least 30 minutes long. 30 minutes is just a guide, most of my interviews have been closer to an hour. It's not uncommon that the interview can be 2 hours. Beyond that, maybe it's not so good for elderly people. Now, the interview can be in different languages. Okay, if the person doesn't speak English, the interview can be, for example, in Tamil or in Mandarin or Chinese dialect, but the transcript has to be in English, right? Because that is the medium that we are using. The paper should not exceed 3,000 words. What should it contain, right? It should reflect on how the interview went. Okay, how do you think the interview unfolded? What you learned from it, and how you can improve future interviews. It should relate to the secondary literature and the oral history collections we discussed in class. And you will need to use citations. Citations to be excluded from the word count. And I always like this part of oral history, and that is that if the interviewee during the interview says, okay, I have a photograph or I have a letter, that I talked about earlier on. I actually have it still. Do you want me to show you? Can you show it to me? Right. So if the interviewee volunteers to share these artifacts and paraphernalia with you, photographs, certificates, personal writings, sometimes the interviewee is trying to remember a place, and the best way, right? If they talk about it, talking is not always the best way. Although it's oral history, there are other ways to complements, supplements the interview, and drawings, right? Personal maps are often very useful. So some of my interviews, the interviewee actually wrote a map, drew out a map. So include these things, right? These are optional things, but do include them if the interviewee shares them with you. What else do I want to say? Okay, I should say that the paper for this final project is not about how good the interview went. It doesn't mean that if you say that the interview didn't go well, that I will give you a poor grade. What I want to see is whether you are aware of how the interview went, and you are able to reflect on your own interview. I think that is the best way to learn from an oral history interview. It's actually the best way to learn from anything if you are self-aware, right? So I like you to be honest in this final project. After all, I'm the only one who will read it, and if you say, like last year when I had my previous class, one of the students said, the interview was quite difficult because the topic, I didn't know how to ask further questions because of the topic. Sometimes you're not familiar with the topic, right? The topic might be very familiar to the interviewee, but as you, the interviewer, even if you read up on it, if you try to do some background research, you don't necessarily understand either the topic itself because it's technical, or it is quite specific, or you don't understand the background, right? Because it's history. It's something that happened a long time ago and might have changed already. So all these are very common things that happen in oral history. I've encountered it many times. So I want to say this, right? Again, that a final project, the grading is not over how well it went. It's over how you applied what you learned in the seminars to an actual oral history interview, and how well you are able to reflect on this interview itself. Hope I made myself clear. Okay. Now this is a common thing that we all share in the humanities and social sciences and the history department as well. This is very important. NUS takes this very seriously, as do I. Plagiarism. All right, please do not plagiarize from others. You cannot say that you do not know. Right, so ignorance is not an acceptable reason. Right, because we have explained to you very clearly what plagiarism is and how to avoid it. Okay, let me elaborate. So anything that you want to quote, like you want to take all the words, like this paragraph from a source, a textbook or a reading, you want to put it in your paper, you have to quote it. So you must be placed within quotation marks, accompanied by a footnote, page number. Right, then you can properly acknowledge your source. So it can't be passed off as your own work. I find that often the best way is not to quote. You quote selectively where necessary, but I mean, if you quote, if your paper is full of quotes, you look quite silly. So it's often better to paraphrase, which is to say you write it in your own words. Right, so please read these two paragraphs here. This is the original text, and this is the plagiarism. It's almost the same, right? So you cannot avoid plagiarism by changing a few words, right? It's not good enough because you can still tell this is not your own work. This comes from here, right? So you cannot avoid plagiarism by changing a few words only. So how do you avoid plagiarism? Do something like this, right? You digest the original, you process it, and you know what your assignment is about. Now, how relevant is this passage to your assignment? Right? You don't need the whole thing. Usually you don't need the whole thing. You need a part of it. You need an idea. So you write it in your own words. You paraphrase it. So it naturally becomes very different. It becomes much shorter. Right? So this is a good sign, right? When the new paragraph is much shorter than the original one. And the word structure, the words themselves, the adjectives, the sentence structure is completely changed, right? So as long as you use the material for your own arguments, you use it, you digest it, and you use it yourself, you'll be safe. Okay, if you just take it and use it, change a few words, that's still plagiarism. So, in other words, the solution to plagiarism is one, honesty. Second, just as importantly, second, it is understanding. Right? If you understand what you need, if you understand what you want to write, then you can easily avoid plagiarism. Okay. A few other things. Style is something that historians and academics focus a lot on, and we are using the Chicago Manual of Style. So if you want to cite a source, a website, or a textbook, follow this link and use the Chicago Manual of Style. Okay, what do I look for in the grading system now? There are these numbers here, okay? But for me, I would say I try to follow these numbers, but the most important thing for me is that I can see that you are learning about oral history, that you have understood and you have tried to apply those ideas to your own research and to your own proposal and final project. Alright, so that is the main thing I want to say. The other thing is, some of you might not be very confident in your English. You might still be learning English because English wasn't your mother tongue. That's fine, right? I used to teach in Korea, and the Korean students have a very natural struggle with English, right? Because they only learn it as a second language. So it doesn't mean I would penalize you if you your English is not like Victorian English or Queen's English. Okay, what I want to see is that you're able to express good ideas, is that you're self-aware, and you're thinking, you're learning. That's the main thing. So don't be afraid, right? If also the same thing for the seminar itself. If you feel a bit awkward or uncomfortable because your English might not be as good, don't let that stop you, right? Find a way to speak up. I'll give you as much chance as you can. I want everyone to be involved in the seminars, not just one or two people. I want everyone to participate and to learn from the seminar, right? And if your English needs to improve, then the only way to improve it is by using it. Okay, so some final points to note. Yeah, this is mostly about the seminars. The readings are important. All the various tasks that I'll talk about are important. Just one point here. Now, when you are trying to look for an interviewee, especially for those of you who are not from Singapore, right? I don't expect the Singaporeans to have any problems really with finding an interviewee. But if you're not from Singapore, you can interview someone like a family member or something uh, on Zoom. You can use Zoom to do the recording. And Zoom is very good because it allows video recording. Now, don't try to contact NGOs and local academics for help. Please don't bother them. Okay, they're often very tied up with their own work. They often are not, the NGOs, community groups, often are not well resourced. So they're one person to take care of a lot of matters and they have to reply to your inquiries. So don't. Try to find your own interviewees from your own sources and networks. Try not to bother the NGOs and community groups. Okay? If you really need help, come and speak to me. We'll talk about it finally. Okay, and finally, I want to just prepare you, really, that our course is not maybe like your typical academic module. As I said before, I'm really a practitioner, right? So I wear an academic hat, but I am also someone who uses heritage and history, for my livelihood, for my work, for my projects. So I have designed for you very nice range of activities and readings. So readings are a very important part of the module. You can't run away from that. So there's a compulsory reading every week. One compulsory reading, so don't complain already, it's only one. And there'll be optional secondary readings if you want to follow up. Alright, so I suggest if you follow up, if for that particular topic, right, it's something related to your proposal and final project, you follow up. Otherwise, optional. But there are other things to do, right? There's often, always, not often, a number of oral history interviews online to read. So this will be like your encounter with oral history that's been done before. Like for example, our second week, we'll have a compulsory reading here, which is really an introduction to oral history and the history of oral history in a sense by Robert Perks and Alistair Thompson, who are very experienced oral historians, and then a couple of secondary readings here. And then there are the tasks, right? The tasks will involve the project, proposal or project discussion. So we'll go around the class and see, what you like to do for your project, and subsequent weeks we will try to find out updates from you, how far you have gone, and if you have any problems finding an interviewee or finding a topic or things like that. Right? And then this will be followed by actual interviews on the website, number of websites. Okay, so some of these are oral history websites maintained by as oral history collections maintained by certain academic institutions or community networks or libraries. And sometimes they contain oral history interviews, sometimes they contain only the synopsis. Right? So we'll be looking through some of these and trying to find out, because this tells us some of the developments, but also some of the problems in oral history as a project. It's very hard to sustain that digital presence and to put everything online. I just want to go through one, so there will be like YouTube or podcasts interviews that I'll include. So, one of the things that I want to do in this course is to look at the shifts and the changes in oral history in the present day. Right? Oral history has become much more diverse. In a sense, it's become more vague as the years have passed, and with the advent of social media and platforms, e-platforms that you can easily use So we'll be looking at YouTube and podcasts, and trying to see is this good oral history, and what is the state of oral history in the future going forward. Okay. All right. Okay. So as I said earlier, on some weeks there will be a talk by an expert on oral history who will come and talk about their own work, and I think this is very interesting because the lineup I've organized so far, I'm very excited about it. We have got people who have worked on very different kinds of oral history. I'm really interested to learn from them, as you should be as well. Then on some other weeks, we will have 1 hour for these sorts of guests to come and join us and talk to us. So on some weeks it will be the presentation by the expert. On other weeks it will be a role play. Okay, sometimes unfortunately you have to role play with me, all right, or with each other, right? One interviewer and interviewee, and we'll role play and try to find out how to put the concepts and the skills into practice, and also to use the role play as a way to discuss some of the issues in oral history. Then you can see it come alive. You see, it's not just something you read about in the book, but something that is really part of our practice. On Seminar 8, we'll have a training workshop thanks to the National Archives of Singapore and their Oral History Center. Okay, so a number of things you have to prepare every week. The readings, the oral history collections or interviews, and so don't just consume them, don't just read them, right? Read them with the idea that you want to learn something from the class, right? So ask yourself questions all the time when you read. Just because it's published doesn't mean it's always right. What are the implications of this idea, of this argument? Can it be practiced? What are the issues of putting it into practice? And the same also with the social media and the e-platforms for oral history. Is social media a good platform for oral history? What are the implications, and so on? All right. So it's going to end here soon. Almost up already. Next week, so please come prepared. Do the reading by Robert Perks and Thompson, and look through the 2 oral history collections online, British Library and the New York Oral History Collection, which has a very interesting interview by Sri Makka. Right, and then we'll have a guest speaker as well. The guest speaker will usually come in the beginning at 6, and Dr. Herma Kirupalini will be joining us to talk about her wonderful research with on the Guptas. Okay, so yeah, and you used up all my time already. So if there are any questions, please let me know. You can email me. I'm always available. Not available physically in the office, but virtually and through email, I'm always available. So I really look forward to meeting you on the second week. Yeah, that's all I want to say. I hope that was a good introduction. See you soon again. Bye.